Well, a warm welcome once again to everyone. And of course, I neglected to mention a warm welcome to all our brothers and sisters and everyone watching on Zoom as well. It's lovely to have you all with us. Our brother Steve has asked that we take a reading from Genesis chapter 34 as an introduction to his remarks. And so I'll now ask Brother Marty Pitt to come and to read that for us.
Good evening, brothers and sisters and young people, friends. Reading with you Genesis chapter 34, and I'm reading from the New King James this evening. Now, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. His soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as a wife." And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. Now his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. And the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it. And the men were grieved and very angry, because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife, and make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters to yourselves. So you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourselves in it." Then Shechem said to her father and her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me, but give me the young woman as a wife." But the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. But on this condition we will consent to you. If you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. But if you will not heed us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone." And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. So the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. He was more honorable than all the household of his father. And Hamor and Shechem his son came to the gate of their city and spoke with the men of their city, saying, "These men are at peace with us. Therefore let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men consent to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and every animal of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us." And all who went out of the gate of his city heeded Hamor and Shechem his son. Every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. Now it came to pass on the third day, when they were all in pain, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because their sister had been defiled. They took their sheep, their oxen, and their donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field, and all their wealth. All their little ones and their wives they took captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I." But they said, "Should he treat our sister like a harlot?"
Thanks, Brother Marty, for that reading. And with those thoughts in mind, we'll now invite Brother Steve to come forward and to lead us in our first study to the title Relationships and Connections. Thanks, Brother Steve.
Good. Well, thanks, Brother Vaughan, and good evening to you all, my dearly beloved brothers and sisters in our Lord Jesus Christ, and dear young people. It really is lovely to be here and to share fellowship with you around God's Word. And Brother Vaughan sort of intimated at the beginning of his remarks there just how lucky you are here, because I'm looking around at you and it's the most amazing sight I can see. No one wearing masks. I think you're the only state, maybe Tasmania, I'm not sure. But, the last 7 to 8 weeks in Adelaide, we've been having, as audience members, to wear masks for the whole meeting, except for the emblems, but singing and listening to the talks. So this is a very strange feeling at the moment for me. So it's lovely to be here from that point of view as well, but clearly lovely to be here to share fellowship with you as well. I bring apologies from my wife, who can't be here this weekend. Our daughter's getting married in 4 weeks' time, and priorities are for the wedding, so don't feel put out, okay? But any mother that's been in this situation will know that that's the beginning of the stress and the worry. So she's at home preparing that, and we're here to share some time with you. Now, we're going to look at a most inspiring and exciting subject, the subject of the Levites, because it's a subject that starts right at the beginning, as we had in that reading in Genesis 34, but it takes us right through the Bible. It can't be contained in just one book. It's a theme that runs through the scriptures. It's wonderful. It really is. It's a big subject, but I've really enjoyed studying it, and I want to share some things with you about the Levites over the course of the weekend. But the first talk is called Relationships and Connections, and I just want to sort of begin by highlighting something which has only really struck me this week, because some things have happened in our lives just in the last week, which shows why this subject is so important to understand and get a grip on. In the last week, we have been made aware and it impacts on our family. Two things. One is a family whose wife, the wife has just upped and walked out and gone. And she's left the husband behind, she's left the children behind, and she says, "I'm out." And we don't know where she's gone, we don't know if she's okay or where she is or anything like that. And the relationship obviously is broken down on a number of levels, as husband and wife and with the children, but obviously clearly with God as well. So So this just hit me when I was looking through this, ready and preparing for this weekend. And there's some very good friends, like very close friends of ours that live in the UK, because that's where we did live for a number of years. Their son has just told them that he wants to resign from fellowship. And the reason he gave was because he just can't or won't build a relationship with God. Work's taken over. It's not as if he's left to go, binging and just into the world, still living at home, but just says, I can't build a relationship with God. So it might turn around, might come good. We hope and pray it will. But it just felt like this subject is as crucial to understand. Here's a man, Levi. We're going to see relationships and connections in his life in a way that is going to impact all of us. And these things I'm telling you aren't the end. It's going to keep going like that right through, I believe, until the return of Christ. We've got to encourage each other to hang on as much as possible. Young and old, all of us in our ecclesias, not just here, but across the ecclesial world. So I think this is a fantastic subject from that point of view. Now, the story of the Levites is a big subject, but I just want to begin by taking you to a passage where our title comes from, okay, in Malachi chapter 3. So just turn to Malachi 3 to begin with. And you know these words well. You probably know them off by heart because they're so famous. We use these words quite a lot. In chapter 3 in verse 16 to verse 18. But we're going to find reason to keep coming back to this section and to see these words in their application to the Levites, because Malachi is a Levitical book. And all the language in Malachi is Levite language. And the classic section here, just let's read verse 16. Then they that feared Yahweh spake often one to another, and Yahweh hearkened and heard it. And a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared Yahweh and that thought upon his name. And they shall be mine. Okay, so there's our title. We've borrowed it from here. We're going to see that all these lines are all Levite language. They shall be mine, saith Yahweh of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels, and I will spare them as a man spareth his own son that serveth him. Then shall ye return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serveth God and him that serveth him not. So just tuck that away, okay? Just store that up, and we're going to find out each study is going to bring us back here at the end, and we're going to see what part of that relates to our theme. But that's where our theme comes from, the title. Well, where does the story of the Levites begin? Well, it actually begins a little bit before Genesis 34. It actually begins back in Genesis 29. So, if you will, come back to Genesis 29, because it begins with the birth of Levi to Leah. Remember Leah? She was the first wife of Jacob, and she was the older sister. And it's quite important to know the background to the story of Levi's birth. Because you remember, Jacob married two sisters, didn't he? One he married because he was tricked, and the other he married because he loved her. All right, and that's a recipe for disaster in any story. And here's Leah. She feels unloved by Jacob, and she's got this incredible jealousy of her sister Rachel and the love he had for her. Whereas Rachel felt unlovable because she was barren. She couldn't have children. And so she's incredibly jealous of her sister Leah and the children Jacob had by her. So jealousy on both sides. And these are his two wives. It's quite a family. Leah craved to be loved like Rachel was, and Rachel craved to have children like Leah had. It's pretty tense, isn't it? Just hearing that, pretty tense. Now, a sense of this tension is found here with Leah's first three pregnancies, particularly in the naming of her children. an event that seems to be left to the women to do. Now, each child that's born accentuates the cravings that Leah had for Jacob's attention and love, and that intense rivalry that existed between her and her sister. Have a look at chapter 29 and verse 32. So here's the first one. Verse 31, when Yahweh saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben. But she said, surely Yahweh hath looked upon my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. I'm stuck. It's not going up or down. Good. Just froze for a little bit there. You must have scared it. Okay. So she's one up. Okay, I'm one up on my sister. Then in verse 33, and she conceived again and bare a son and said, because Yahweh hath heard that I was hated, he hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. I'm two up, she says. And then in verse 34, she conceived again and bare a son and said, now, this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name also called Levi. So she's borne him 3 sons. And you can feel Leah's need for attention, can't you? And, you know, for those of you who've had that craving for attention, we've all had it. Okay, you know it's all consuming. It just eats you out, takes over every waking moment, and it's eating Leah out here. Now, surely, she says, this time Jacob will do something. Surely he has to take notice of me and be joined to me. Now, I think this tells us a little bit about Leah. I think this is suggesting that family connections were more of a priority to Leah than a connection with God. You get that sense coming out of there? Family connections were more of a priority than a connection with God. And so she has to learn to transcend the rivalry and the competition and the natural lineage that exists through her sons, to rise above all that to a relationship with God. But she's not there yet. She's got to learn that. Her focus was on herself. Each son that she had showed more and more of her self-will rather than God's will. In fact, did you notice that God really isn't even mentioned except to support her own self-will and determination to be loved? Yeah, of course, Jacob doesn't change, does he? Doesn't change one bit. So her 4th son sees Leah make a change. Verse 35, and she conceived again and bare a son, and she said, now will I praise Yahweh. Therefore she called his name Judah and left bearing. And you can just see I've highlighted this word now, or the word also. It had been now Jacob will love me. Now Jacob will love me. Finally, the 4th son, now Yahweh will be praised. I will praise Yahweh. Previously she had said, now this time Jacob will do something. But of course he never does. He doesn't do anything. So now Leah will do something. What does she do? Well, she changes her priorities. She moves the focus of her relationship. Previously, it was all about her husband. Now it's all about her God. And that in itself is an incredibly powerful lesson to learn, isn't it? That's what life's all about. That's what your life and my life is all about. Learning that a relationship with God is far more important than any relationship we might have amongst our family or our friends. That's the relationship that will hold us true. to accept that the only relationship that really matters, the only one that really matters, whether you're young, whether you're old, is the one that we have with God. All other relationships are assessed on the basis of whether they help or they hinder your relationship with God. And so here Leah, she's beginning to learn this lesson. And ultimately, we know that she did learn this lesson. How do we know that? Well, where was she buried? Where was Leah buried? She was buried next to her husband, wasn't she? In the cave of Machpelah. Next to her husband. She learned that lesson, and Yahweh allowed her to be buried right next to the one that she craved attention from, but never got. So she developed a relationship with God, by which God then said, right, I'll put you next to your husband. It's wonderful, really, how it all worked out. But it's nigh impossible for you, once you work out your relationship with God, to pass that lesson to your children. And it was impossible for Leah to just force that onto her children. It was going to have to be something that they would have to learn for themselves. This idea of a relationship with God is personal. And so this includes Levi. It's a hard lesson to learn, a painful lesson. And it was painful for Levi, but learn it he did. And that's what this first study will concentrate on. So just to finish a bit of the background tapestry, okay? After 4 children, Leah stops bearing, as we know. So in chapter 30, verse 1 and 2, when Rachel saw that she bare no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, give me children or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in God's stead, who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? So Rachel's envy brings out her determination, and she yells at Jacob, and he yells back at her. And Rachel's got dagger eyes for Leah, hasn't she? She's eyeing up Leah and all the children that she's got, and Rachel's feeling desperate. And this desperation's coupled with immense jealousy. And so she gives her handmaid as a wife to Jacob. She keeps the tension going. And in verse 9, we read, when Leah saw that she had left bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her Jacob to wife. And so Leah seizes her opportunity and gives her handmaid as a wife to Jacob also. So she keeps that tension going. She's still got something to learn, has Leah. So picture the scene. Okay, 1 man, 4 wives, 12 sons, 1 daughter that we know of. There's rivalry, there's competition, there's henpecking, there's selfishness, there's envy. It's all in the mix, isn't it? That was home life for Jacob and for Levi. Imagine yourself living in that situation. How would you cope? And of course, at the top of the tree, right at the top of the tree, was Reuben. Pathetic. Weak and indecisive was Reuben. Unstable as water, says Jacob. Shows no leadership qualities at all, does Reuben. So who does that leave? Well, we're going to learn, brothers and sisters, that the real leaders of all those boys were the 2 next in line, Simeon and Levi. Thick as thieves, these 2. They're the real movers and shakers of the family. But we're jumping a little bit ahead here. So you got the picture? This is home life. This is family life for Jacob and his boys, of which Levi is number 3. So let's go to the reading that we had. The next incident, the next major incident about Levi is in Genesis 34. And I'm sure you all know this story. It's the story of Dinah, Jacob's youngest child, and only named daughter. We know that he had daughters, but we just don't know the names of the other daughters. So she's the only one singled out by name. And she's a daughter by Leah. Remember that. One of Leah's children. Okay? And she wants a bit of girl company, and she gets all mixed up in boy trouble. All right, familiar story? Hope not here, but it's a familiar story in the world, isn't it? Well, here, Dinah, she's feeling a bit left out. All the boys are older than her, and she's gone out, and she's found this boy. Except that the boy just happens to be a prince. It's no ordinary boy. He's a prince of the local territory where Jacob was dwelling. So we know the story in Genesis 34. What we may not know is, well, why is it in the scriptures? Because it's a bit awkward reading sometimes, isn't it? In the readings. You know, this story and a few other stories are those awkward chapters. How do you deal with this story? Well, I'm going to suggest it's actually the story of two groups of people and two brothers. Okay? Two groups of people have their origins in this story. The two groups of people are the Levites, which we're studying this weekend, and the other group are called the Hivites. Have a look at verse 2 of Genesis 34. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite. Anyone know what another name for the Hivites was elsewhere in Scripture? Do you know? I don't mind if you answer from the floor, to be honest. Anyone know where the Hivites come up again? It's really interesting. That's why I'm asking if you know. Ah, okay. Worth coming out then, wasn't it? Huh? Hivites. Do you know the other name for the Hivites was the Gibeonites? All right, Joshua chapter 9. They are also called Hivites. Okay? And these two groups of people are poles apart in this chapter. You've got the Levites and the Hivites, okay? And they are poles apart. But over time, over a long period of time, we're going to see how those two groups of people get right up close to each other and join together. It's a remarkable story, okay? How those two groups of people start so far apart but get joined together. So that's one story that has its origins here. The other story is about two brothers, Simeon and Levi, and these two brothers are thick as thieves. They start together like this, inseparable. But over time, we're going to see how they are pushed apart. Okay? So, two groups of people that start like that, end up like that. Two brothers that start like that, but end up like that. It's incredible how Genesis 34 is placed here to get you thinking about the origins of these two brothers and these two groups of people. Now, remember Reuben? Okay, remember the hen-pecked firstborn? All right? I can just imagine Reuben just getting picked on by the two mothers all the time and being the spy between the two mothers. Just an unpleasant position to be in, but he was weak. He was unstable. You couldn't count on Reuben. So Simeon and Levi assumed the role of leadership. This is brothers number 2 and 3 in the family. And it's obvious here that they are in the driver's seat in this family. They're the ringleaders of these brothers. And they connive a plan of revenge. But it meant abusing the covenant of circumcision. All right, devastating that they did this. Now, what was their reasoning for this act of revenge? Well, in verse 2, we read, "And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her." So Shechem, has his way with Dinah. He defiles her. And that's their reason to get this revenge. Have a look at verse 7. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard of it, and the men were grieved, upset. They were very angry, very wroth. Why? Because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. Okay, hadn't Shechem heard of proposing first? You know, quaint idea in the world today. Proposing first, then marriage, before getting physical. And you know, we can agree with the sentiments and can understand their anger, Simeon and Levi. But what's their true motives? Well, look at verse 13. And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully. Okay, so this is hiding their true motives. What they said here isn't actually the truth of their motives. It's deceitful. And they said, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. In fact, they say this 3 times. Right, you may like to jot them down there. Verse 27, the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. Verse 31, they said to their father, and they said, should he deal with our sister as with a harlot? No humility, no apology, just should he deal with our sister as a harlot? In other words, our actions are justified. Got it? That's how they talk to their dad. All right? Now, look at those 3 statements, and out of that, deduce what was their issue. What was their issue? And from those 3 statements, which all say the same thing, there's 2 possibilities. 2 possibilities. Number 1, that Dinah had been defiled. I mean, that would be the reasonable possibility, wouldn't it? That their sister had been humbled, that their sister had been defiled, and that angered them. But I'm going to suggest, brothers and sisters, that the real motive was because it was their sister. Okay? You see, Dinah was the full-blooded sister of Simeon and Levi through Leah. And if you read the rest of the scriptures and you have a look at the lives of these boys, they actually didn't have a problem with humbling women. Okay, Simeon ends up marrying a Canaanitish woman, probably even one of the women from sacking this city. Okay, Genesis 46 verse 10 would be a note to jot down for Simeon, where he got his wife from and how he treated women. And we know Judah's treatment of women in Genesis 38, don't we? He also marries a Canaanite, but it's also clear he's got, other bits on the side, has Judah. A fact that Tamar knew very well and uses it to her advantage. So I don't think you can tell me that their problem was that their sister had been defiled. That really isn't their issue. They don't have too much of a problem with that because they do it themselves. Their problem was because it was their sister. And I'm going to suggest that natural relationships were more important to Simeon and Levi than a relationship with God. Where have you heard that before? Doesn't that sound awfully similar to Leah? I mean, this is just the echo of Leah coming down into the next generation. And to demonstrate the truth of this, brothers and sisters, these 2 boys went and took one of the most sacred covenants God had given and abused it, twisting it to their advantage without any recognition of its importance or meaning. So we need to just stop just for a brief moment and say, well, what was the meaning of the covenant of circumcision? What was it all about? Now, I know we say that it's the cutting off of the flesh, that it represents the removing of the foreskin of our hearts, and that's all true and right, as seen in Romans and Colossians through the Apostle Paul. But I want to just pare it right back to basics, go right back to the time that it was first given in Genesis 17. So let's go back to Genesis 17 briefly, where this covenant was given. because the timing of this covenant holds the key. Let me maybe put it to you in a nutshell without going into all the fine detail, all right? If you work out all the timings in the story of Abraham, you will discover that Abraham was told to be circumcised, in other words, given the covenant of circumcision, at pretty much precisely the same time that Isaac was conceived. You just think about the ramifications of that. Right? That's the timing, how it's presented in the scriptures. Just think of the incredibleness of that. Because the prime focus of the covenant of circumcision is, I'm going to suggest, on the fatherhood of God. Let me show you this in Genesis 17. Verse 2. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. Now, this phrase, my covenant, okay, in this section dealing with circumcision occurs 7 times. 7 times God says this. It's my covenant. It's the covenant number 7. My covenant. This is truly Yahweh's covenant. Well, what was the covenant? Verse 4. As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, that thou shalt be a father of many nations. Now, you may have it written in next to verse 4 that the word nations there is the Hebrew word goyim. Okay, if you haven't, write it in, because that's a word used exclusively for Gentiles. Abraham, I'm going to make you a father. Really? I'm already a father. Okay, he'd already had a son, hadn't he? He'd already got Ishmael. No, I'm going to make you a father, not through natural descent. You're a father at the moment, and it's a natural father-son relationship, but I'm going to make you a different father. I'm going to make you a father of a group of people of all races and nations. How? How do you do that? Well, not naturally. I'm going to make you a father just like me, says God. A spiritual father of a family like you've never seen before. That's why this covenant is between me and you. You'll notice that. See that in verse 2? I will make my covenant between me and thee. Go through and count how many times that occurs. Me and you, Abraham. Me and you. You're going to be like me. Me and you are going to be fathers. 5 times, he says, me and you. You and me are in this together, Abraham. So the question is, how is Abraham going to become a father of this people, this family? All right, these Gentiles. I mean, he's a Jew. He's the first Hebrew. How are they going to become part of this family? Well, verse 10 says it would be through circumcision. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you, and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. And ye shall, verse 11, circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. So Abraham would cut off a piece of skin that defines a man's fatherhood. In fact, the irony is that in the very cutting off, it incapacitated Abraham to be a natural father for a period of time. So how would Abraham become a father if he can't be a father? Well, Abraham would have to rely and trust in God's fatherhood, because the clear implication here is that God's fatherhood is never incapacitated. He will fulfill his promise of a seed. Hence, Isaac is called the child of promise and was conceived at this very precise time that Abraham was incapacitated. Now, is that what circumcision is all about? Are we on the right track? Have we got it right? Well, come to the New Testament. Have a look at Romans 4. What does Paul say about this? Because Paul quotes from Genesis 17. What's his conclusion? Romans chapter 4. Verse 11. And he, Abraham, received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had yet been uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe. So it's not just limited to Jews. See that? It's you as well as me. All them that believe. Abraham, you'll be the father of them all. And the sign of circumcision proves this. Though they be not circumcised, that righteousness might be imputed unto them also. Well, what sort of father? Come down to verse 16. Therefore, it is of faith that it might be by grace. A father by God's grace. Remember that phrase? Me and you. Me and you. 5 times that occurred in Genesis 17. It might be by grace. To the end, the promise might be sure to all the seed, not to that only which is of the law, but to that also which is of the faith of Abraham. Now notice this, who is the father of us all. How is Abraham your father? Clearly not through natural descent. You see, the whole sign of circumcision was about becoming a father, but not by natural means. So the very natural means of becoming a father was incapacitated, to prove the point. And so in verse 17, as it is written, so this is a quote from Genesis 17. He proves his point by going back to Genesis 17. I have made thee a father of many nations. Okay, we saw that word was goyim, Gentiles. It includes you and me here tonight, brothers and sisters. And then it says, before him whom he believed. Now, the phrase before him, you'll notice in the margin, it actually has 2 definitions. And I think the one in the margin is preferable. Like unto him. Who's the him? Well, it's God. Like unto God. I'm going to make your father like unto me. You see that? That's what God is saying him. The word before means to stand in the presence of or to be in the likeness of. And I think that second usage is what's being meant here. Abraham, you are going to be in the likeness of me, in your capacity as a father, a spiritual father. So Paul's exposition of Genesis 17 tells us that circumcision is a seal of Abraham's faith in the fatherhood of God. And it's not limited by natural descent, but it's motivated by faith and grace and can cross races and nations. And here's Simeon and Levi saying, well, we're not really all bothered about the fatherhood of God. We're not interested in that. We don't understand any of that. That's not our concern, they said. Our concern is about the fatherhood of Jacob, our father that flows through by natural descent into our little sister and shares the same mother as us. And so they took that sacred covenant that defines the very intimate relationship that one can have with God when they accept him as their father, and used it in their malicious, cruel plan to seek revenge for their natural sister. Can you see this idea of connections and relationships sort of building to a crescendo in the story of Simeon and Levi? They had one focus only, that of natural relationships. It consumed them. It ate them out to the total exclusion of God. That's how we started with Leah, wasn't it? It just ate her out. She craved attention from Jacob until she learnt to change. And in order to accomplish their evil goal, they gave a false message of hope. Come back to Genesis 34. They gave a false message of hope. Remember, their answer was deceitful. And they completely hoodwinked Shechem and Hamor with this false message of hope. Okay, in verse 16, they said, then we will give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters unto us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. One people. Okay, they gave this feigned sense of peace. Have a look at verse 21. Well, actually, in verse 22, just to stay on that theme of one people, Shechem and Hamor took that message back to their own people and said, hey, look, they told us we can do this. Okay, only herein will the man consent unto us, verse 22, for to dwell with us, to be one people if. So they took that false message back. They fully trusted in that and took it back to their own people and conveyed this sense of being unified together. And in verse 21, they also said that the sense we got from Simeon and Levi and from all those brothers was that they're a peaceable lot. Okay, they just want peace with us. They got no cruel intent whatever. Didn't detect anything like that. They concluded that Simeon and Levi and the whole family of Jacob were a peaceable lot, not realizing in the slightest that inside Simeon and Levi's hearts there was nothing but cruel, vindictive rage. They disguised it. And in this story, brothers and sisters, in this story, Shechem was more honorable. Have a look at verse 19. And the young man deferred not to do the thing because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father. You see, Shechem kept his promise. He knew the meaning of sacrifice, did Shechem. He had prepared himself to accept it. He was predictable because he was dependable. He knew the meaning of sacrifice. Now, I want you to just tuck that thought away, and we'll come back to that, I think, Saturday night, all right? The meaning of sacrifice. Shechem knew the meaning of sacrifice, but Simeon and Levi, they didn't know the first thing about the meaning of sacrifice. They took the soft option, the coward's battle. They really were a bunch of sick cowards, these two boys. In fact, in verse 30, Jacob says, you've made me to stink like a bad offering. Instead of a sweet-smelling savour, this one had an odious, gut-wrenching stench about it. You know, the stench that makes you want to vomit is what Jacob is saying. That's what you've made me feel like, he says about his two boys. No, there's not a shred of self-sacrifice anywhere in this story from Simeon or Levi. Even the trade negotiations are shown to be selfish to the core. You know, all bartering, okay, and as a business owner, I know a bit about bartering and negotiations. All bartering and trade negotiations have a bit of give and take, don't they? All right, a bit of give and a bit of take. All right. Now, Shechem and Hamor say as such in verse 8 and 9 and in verse 12. Okay, so verse 8, and Hamor communed with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you, give him to wife. And make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters unto us, and take our daughters unto you. And then in verse 12, ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as you shall say unto me, but give me the damsel to wife. And you can see in verse 16 and 17 that Simeon and Levi answer in kind. They say, then we will give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us. So a bit of give and take. Okay, that's what a negotiation normally has, a bit of give and take. But what actually happened? Notice what happened in the story, brothers and sisters. Have a look at verse 27. So give and take, and then Simeon and Levi, give and take. What actually happened? Have a look at verse 27. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their sheep, they took their oxen, they took their asses, they took that which was in the city, they took that which is in the field, they took all their wealth, they took their little ones, they took their wives captive and spoiled even all that was in the house. It was never about giving anything. It was only about take. There was never any intention of giving anything. Selfish to the core, just take. It's mine, it belongs to me, in their revenge. So, what have we learned about Simeon and in particular, Levi from Genesis 34. Well, their relationship with their sister was more important to them than their relationship with God. Now, just as you're reading that, just put yourself in this equation. How are you tracking in your relationship with God? Where's it at? Okay? Their relationship with their sister was more important to them than their relationship with God. They willingly abused the special covenant of circumcision. They gave a false message of peace, of being joined together. It's a bit ironic, really, because what does Levi's name mean? Joined. No intention of joining whatsoever had Levi. They lacked any understanding of the meaning of sacrifice, didn't know what it meant at all. Their sacrifice was one that stank. Never intended to give, only to take. So that's our introduction to Levi. Great start, isn't it, for a series? This is Levi, not a particularly nice one, is it? Well, let's leave Genesis 34 for now. Years pass by, okay, and the terrible things that happened to Joseph have occurred, and all the amazing things that happened to Joseph have also occurred. So we're going right forward in history. The family has been saved from the famine. They're all now in Egypt. And now we get to Genesis 49. And Jacob is on his deathbed. He's about to pass off the scene. He's going to give his last words, okay? Final words to his boys. What was he? 145? Jacob, okay? Old man on his deathbed, all his boys around him. He's got his last words before he passes off the scene. His last requests. Look what he says about Simeon and Levi. It's in verse 5 down to verse 7. Now you'll notice in verse 5, Simeon and Levi are lumped together. He doesn't do that with any of the others. And it soon becomes clear why he does. Judah, Joseph, they get the biggest mention. Nothing but wonderful words are said about those two boys. Judah and Joseph, beacons. Simeon and Levi get the next biggest section, and nothing but contempt and disgust is expressed by Jacob. It's a stinging rebuke from Jacob. You wouldn't want to be listening to these words if this is what your father was going to say to you on his deathbed. The last remaining words that he says to you are a stinging rebuke, full of disgust and contempt. Can't bear to look at you. Spit out your name. Now, it's obvious from the tenor of his words that Jacob has had no reason to change his assessment of these two boys from what he said in Genesis 34. You make me to stink. And nothing's changed. He can't find one good thing to say about them. In his view, they're still rotten stinkers, these two boys. And yet here he is in the scriptures. Well, I don't have too much time to do this, so I'm going to try and just briefly go through a couple of these points here in Genesis 49, give you a taste of Jacob's blessing to Simeon and Levi. All right, hang on to your hats, because it's not a blessing, really. It's a curse. This is how it comes across. It's called Jacob's blessing, but really it's not. If I was receiving this, I wouldn't take it as a blessing. Okay, but it's under the context of Jacob's blessings. So in verse 5, it says, Simeon and Levi are brethren. Of course they are, thick as thieves, as we've said. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. Okay, instruments of cruelty. This is just a fancy way of saying they loved using swords. Right? They loved the sword and they used it for revenge. All right? Oh, my soul, says Jacob in verse 6. Can you feel the pain? Can you feel the anguish of this old man? The deepest sigh from this old man, full of despair for these two boys. O my soul, come not thou into their secret. Unto their assembly, mine honour, be not thou united. Be not thou united. This word assembly, so I'm sort of lagging a bit there, sorry about that. The slides must be something to do with the computer, I think, but they're coming through half a second after I'm speaking. So that's just saying that the word instruments there and the word habitation has the idea of a sword from stabbing, okay? But this phrase here, unto their assembly, this word assembly, okay, it's the Hebrew word kahal. You might get a picture of this because this is used by the Septuagint as the word ecclesia, okay? So this is the first time this word is used in Scripture, and it's here in Jacob's life. In Genesis 28, verse 3, Jacob is the first person to have this word used of him in Genesis 28, where Isaac asks a blessing from God. And his father Isaac says that out of Jacob will come forth the ecclesia. So Jacob represents the ecclesia. But here in this chapter, right here in this blessing, Jacob is identifying that there's another ecclesia on the scene, another ecclesia being established in opposition to the one that God is making. There's two ecclesias, he says. Stay away from that one. Don't ever let your honor be linked with that one. Remain with this one. It's pretty powerful, isn't it? The last words of Jacob. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Now, it's a little bit confusing here because there's a word here which sounds very similar in Hebrew to another word. So the translators have put down this word wall, but it actually doesn't mean that. So let's go through. Okay. In their self-will, in their delight, all right, in their satisfaction, they digged down a wall. The word digged means to pluck, okay, especially a hamstring, all right, slashing a hamstring. Okay, and the word wall is the Hebrew word, however you say that, shor, and ox, not shore, a wall. It sounded the same when I say it because I don't know Hebrew, but even in Hebrew, they sound very similar. And so the translation is suggested that this word is really oxen, all right, to hough the oxen, hamstrung the oxes. So what they did, they weren't satisfied to just kill the man. They went around and slashed all the legs of the animals. All right. This is revenge. They're more consumed with revenge than they are with booty. They just slash the legs of all the oxen for fun. Not content to just kill the man, they slash the legs of everything that he owned. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Now, this here is quite remarkable because Jacob looks at these two boys who have been locked together like this, and he says they need to be separated. We need to get these two boys apart because if they stay together, the rest of the tribes are going to be wiped out. These two boys need to be pulled apart. It will not survive, these two boys. The 12 tribes, the other brothers, need to be able to grow and mature and develop, but they won't be able to if they stay together. They need to be separated. They'll destroy the rest of the tribes. They're too strong for the other 10 combined. Keep them apart. And so this is Jacob's blessing, all right? He says, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Well, what happened to Simeon? Well, they became the smallest tribe. In fact, Moses doesn't even mention them in his blessings in Deuteronomy 33. They were given just a few cities within the tribe of Judah. So a tribe within a tribe. So small, they were circled by Judah. That's the curse for Simeon. What about Levi? Well, the remarkable thing with Levi was that the curse for them was that they had no actual inheritance. They were given 48 cities. and they were scattered. So Jacob's blessing came to pass. They were scattered throughout those 48 cities, right throughout the land. But in time to come, that was going to turn into a blessing. But we won't know that until study 4, okay? But that's just something to tuck away. So what an indictment. Simeon, Levi, separate. Can't keep them together. What a legacy. What hope was there for either of these two boys? Would you like to be one of those two boys? What hope was there for either of these two boys? Destined for destruction, the two of them. Well, more time passes. There's 250 years in Egypt or so. There's 40 years of wanderings. And now Moses is an old man, about 120 years old, and he's about to pass off the scene, and he gives his last words to the tribes. So I want you to come to Deuteronomy 33 now, because what does he have to say about Simeon and Levi? Oh, this is so remarkable. It's astonishing, really, because in Deuteronomy 33, the first thing to notice is that he's got nothing to say about Simeon at all. Simeon's name's not mentioned here in Deuteronomy 33. Simeon gets no blessing from Moses. The second thing to notice is that Levi is mentioned. But astonishingly, remarkably, incredibly, it's the most glowing endorsement you could possibly get for a blessing. Absolutely remarkable. Rather than not being able to find one good thing to say about them, Moses can't find one bad thing to say about this tribe. It's a wonderful blessing, a remarkable blessing, one that displays the most amazing turnaround in any of the tribes. From Genesis 49, where we've just come from, there's a summary of Genesis 49 and the blessing that Jacob gave. You would look at that and think there was no hope for that boy. And yet here in Genesis 33, Moses says, I can't find one bad thing to say about this tribe. An astonishing turnaround. One of the most remarkable transitions anywhere found in Scripture. So the suggestion is that out of those two boys, out of those two men, they're really men when I say boys, they're old enough to hold a sword, they're a man, they've got married, they've got kids of their own. Out of those two men, one changed. One changed remarkably, and he infused that change into the tribe that bears his name. Now, we haven't really time to go through Moses' blessing. Just pick a couple of things out here. It'll be all on the screen there. If I skip something over, ask for the slides and you can get the rest of it later on. Okay? So, Levi's blessing is in verse 8 to verse 11. Okay? This is Moses' blessing on Levi. It is an endorsement of Levi like you've never read anywhere before. The first time in Scripture that Levi gets an endorsement for what he's been doing rather than contempt and condemnation. Now, in verse 8, I'm just going to suggest that incident seems to be related to Exodus 17. Okay, so that seems to be something that happened at Exodus 17. I can't prove it entirely, but you remember that at Exodus 17, the waters were bitter and they were made sweet. But something happened on that occasion, which is sort of couched in the language here, whereby it would seem the tribe of Levi stood out against all the other tribes. All right, and so Exodus 17 seems to be something that happened. Let me put the rest of that up. Meribah there are two Meribahs mentioned in Scripture, and I've got reasons there to suggest why that Meribah is the waters of Exodus 17, and the Holy One being a reference to the tribe of Levi. Exodus 17. Well, there's a bit of question about that. You remember on that occasion, the question was, is Yahweh among us or not? And it seems to be that Levi on that occasion said, yes, he is. And the rest of the tribe said, no, he's not, because the water's bitter. But Levi said, yes, he is. And according to Moses here, the Levites said yes. And they differed from all the rest of the tribes. But if there's a bit of ambiguity about whether that's Exodus 17 and verse 8, verse 9, there's no ambiguity at all. Verse 9 is Exodus 32. So verse 8 is Exodus 17, verse 9 is Exodus 32. You know about Exodus 32. That's the golden calf, isn't it? And remember the clarion call that Moses cried out, who is on Yahweh's side? Out stood Levi. Out they came in droves. And what did they say on that day? In Exodus 32, you wouldn't read about it. You wouldn't believe it unless it was written here. Who said unto his father and his mother, I have not seen him. Neither did he acknowledge his brethren, nor knew his own children. For they have observed thy word and kept thy covenants. Can you see what's being said here, brothers and sisters? Who said unto his father, I have not seen them. The RSV says, I regard them not. You see, here in this story, in Exodus 32, in this blessing here in Deuteronomy 33, natural lineage no longer means anything when following Yahweh. The fatherhood of God is more valuable than one's natural father. Really? What a change. Who is my father? Who is my mother? It doesn't matter. Are they on Yahweh's side or not? That's the distinguishing factor. If they're not, kill them. That's Exodus 32. Neither did he acknowledge his brethren. The RSV says he disowned his brother. Who was his brother? Simeon. He disowned Simeon. The two that were like that. Now Levi disowns his brother, including his closest brother. Once passionate in sticking close together to Simeon, but not anymore. Nor knew his own children. You see, family pride was the most important thing back in Genesis 34. That deep blood connection between Levi and his sister Dinah was once valued far above a relationship with, well, that's all changed now, brothers and sisters. Change. It's incredible, isn't it? It's astonishing. Are there changes in the way you show a relationship with God needed in your life, brother, sister? You see, it's not too late to change. Levi did. He made that change. It wasn't too late. I'm not going to go through all of these because time is beating us. So we'll be coming back to some of these through the course. So here's the summary of Moses' blessing. Simeon is not even mentioned. They called Yahweh's Holy One, verse 8, who the rest of the nation chided against Massa and Meribah. That's Exodus 17. They stood with Yahweh in the matter of the golden calf and killed brother, mother, sister. They disowned their children. They just upheld Yahweh's covenant, Exodus 32. Moses prays that they might be the teachers of the nation. We're going to come back to that on Sunday morning. And so he asks God to accept the work of the Levites and to destroy any who oppose them. Now, my question to you, okay, and I know it's a bit late and, it's been a long day, but I wouldn't ask you to do anything that I haven't done. I've been up since 5 and we're an hour and a half behind you. So I'm holding up. But we're nearly there. We're nearly through. Where did Levi change? Because there was a change. Has to have been a change somewhere. No good thing said. No bad thing said. Where did it happen? How did it happen? Ever thought about it? Now, I don't know all the answers to this, but I'm just going to put some suggestions here. Okay, go home, sleep on it, have a think about it, come back tomorrow and we can have a chat about it. And just where did this change? It's between the lines. There's no actual incident that sort of singled out, light bulb moment for Levi. We know that he was a ringleader in putting Joseph into the pit. And it's quite interesting to go back to the story of Joseph and find out that when Joseph learnt that Simeon and Levi were the ringleaders, because he didn't know that to start with, but he found that out on the day that they came down to buy corn. He found that out. When he found that out, he separated Simeon from the rest and held him back and made Levi go home. Now, Simeon was the second born. He was the second oldest. It was Simeon he had helped. You ever thought about why Simeon? He's endorsing what his father had said. These two boys need to be separated. I need to break them apart. Jacob said that. Now Joseph is doing exactly the same. Simeon needs to be held apart from Levi. And so Levi goes home and he hasn't got Simeon beside him anymore. And for however long they were back home, until the corn ran out, Simeon wasn't there. Who was Levi next to after Simeon? Who's the next in the family? Well, I think that there's a strong possibility that Levi becomes attached to his next closest brother, Judah. And Judah, we know, went through a reformation. He's changed, is Judah. Judah's on the road to reformation. And Levi starting to see the need to change as well. And he begins a change in himself, does Levi. And then he instills that into his children. And one of his children, his youngest daughter, I believe, was born down in Egypt, Jochebed, okay? She's a daughter of his old age. She doesn't know the Levi that's cruel and vindictive and vengeful. She doesn't know that Levi. She knows the Levi that's changed. And she makes the changes to the family of Levi. And of course, she has 3 wonderful children. She marries Amram, and they have Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. And this becomes the kernel to the change in the tribe of Levi. And of course, the questions that the Levites answered are, is Yahweh among us? Exodus 17, yes, he is. Who is on Yahweh's side? Exodus 32, we are. So where would you place your relationship with God, brothers and sisters, when comparing it to your relationship with family and friends? What's the level? What's the measuring stick? That's really the essence that comes out of this. Is there a relationship that we're holding on to that hinders your relationship with God? Are you holding on to something that's holding you back? Are we prepared to change so our lives are in accordance with Yahweh's ways, regardless what anyone else thinks? Oh, mum says I shouldn't, or dad says I shouldn't. My friends are saying this. Is that more important to you than what God says you should do? Levi had to learn the hard way. We don't have to learn the hard way, brothers and sisters. We can listen to God in the first place. Are we prepared to stand alone for our convictions, whatever the consequences? Levi didn't care, did he, in Exodus 32, about people saying, oh, he's on Yahweh's side. No laughing matter to Levi anymore. What type of instruments occupy our lives? Instruments of righteousness we should be, says Romans 6. You know, it's exactly the same. I've got one more slide. I want to come back to Malachi chapter 3. Remember we said every line of Malachi 3 is Levitical. What parts of tonight come out in chapter 3 of Malachi? What's the part that relates to what we've seen tonight? That we can take home, go to bed, sleep on, pray about, think about as we draw our day to a close by talking to God, as any relationship needs. Do you talk to God in a relationship with God? You need to talk to him. Talk to him tonight and talk about these things. Well, this is the one that I thought of. At the end of verse 16, a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared Yahweh and that thought upon his name. You know, names are the best means of identifying a person. Okay, if I say your name and I don't know you, I don't think anything else about you. But if I say a name and you know that person, what else comes behind the name? You start thinking about the person's personality and their character, don't you? and their warmth and their kindness, if that's the type of person, or their cruelty and their rage, depending on what character that person is. You say the name and it triggers all of those things. That's what a name does. What about Yahweh's name? What does that trigger for you when you hear Yahweh's name? Do you have feelings for Yahweh and his name? You see, to constantly think about Yahweh's name is to think about him as a being, as a character, as a personality in our everyday lives. And then the second phrase comes out in verse 17. I will spare them as a father spareth his only son. You probably need to just circle the word only. All right? What's that saying? What it's saying is that God wants to treat you as his only son. But he wants to treat you as his only son. And he wants to treat you as his only son. That's special, isn't it? All of you are his only son or daughter. That's a connection and a relationship with God, brothers and sisters, that we're aiming for. And by God's grace, when his son returns, his only son, will be there because of his only son. But he's going to treat you like he treats his only son. I can't wait for that day, and I know you can't either. So let's, in the meantime, make the most of our opportunity to build that relationship and connection with God.